Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. In this episode, you will hear part one of my conversation with Jill Petersen Adams from Oxford College of Emory University. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. My guest today is Jill Petersen Adams from Oxford College of Emory University. Jill is the Director of Global Learning and Undergraduate Research, and she is the Senior Lecturer in Interdisciplinary Studies at Oxford.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Jill, for being here with me today. And welcome to being a Digication scholar. I think that so you and I have never met.
Nope.
I think, but I have heard a lot about your work through our colleague Peter McLennan at Oxford, and I believe that it was actually through your previous position, which was the director of
Experiential learning. Yeah.
that I started hearing about your work. So you want to tell us a little bit about what you do at Oxford?
Yes, I love my position. So going into this, I thought, man, if I could design an ideal job for myself, it would be like part professor, part travel agent. That's kind of where I've managed to land. So at Oxford, even when I was director of experiential learning, I had kind of a hybrid faculty and administrative role. For the administrative role, I directed our main areas of experiential learning. So we had programs in areas of community engaged learning, academic internships, undergraduate research, global learning, applied arts. We have an organic farm, and I may have left one off awkwardly. But so we have several of these areas, and I was sort of the more curricular coordinator. So, like, where it really integrates into the academic program, that was where I worked. As those positions grew, we kind of split it. So now I'm focusing on the global learning and undergraduate research because those programs have gotten so large, and we recently brought on an amazing colleague to do some of the other areas. So I'm still working in the same experiential learning milieu, just a little more focused. On my faculty side, my training's in philosophy of religion, but my appointment is in interdisciplinary studies. And it suits me really well because I work with a lot of visual culture studies and memorial culture studies in post-war Japan, and in the past, kind of post-Holocaust, post-Shoah studies. So interdisciplinary studies, my project was always super interdisciplinary, and it wasn't always legible to really more narrowly specialized religion folks or philosophy folks. So now at Oxford, we have only first and second year students. We're kind of a liberal arts intensive area within Emory University. And so I teach a lot of introductory level courses. The course where I first started using ePortfolios was something we call a discovery seminar. And that is something that all first years have to take. It's a very small group. And they're also my group of advisees that I have for the entire time at Oxford. So you get this really like close knit first semester experience, and you get to do really just fun, creative things with the seminar. So I teach that regularly. I teach regular courses like Introduction to Visual Culture. I teach something else that we have that actually the colleague you mentioned before, Peter McLennan, directs at Oxford, which is called the Milestone Portfolio. And that is like a cumulative ePortfolio documenting the student's development for their whole trajectory at Oxford. And So our advisees that we have in this seminar, their very first semester on our campus, they take that a milestone portfolio course in their very last semester, and in between, they're producing their artifacts and kind of documenting their experience at Oxford. So it's fun for me because that means, in terms of like the arc of our general education program, we sort of think of it as like discover, explore, reflect. Discover is sort of the discovery seminar. Explore is like a lot of the experiential learning stuff that I get to do. And then reflect is reflected in the milestone portfolio. So I kind of get to see a lot of the students through their full trajectory. And that's part of what jazzes me up about it.
Yeah. So um, I am jazzed as well. The I wanted to dig deeper into this part that just sounds so much fun. It's the experiential learning piece. Like you said, it's that's where you get to explore. You get to after you discover, explore, reflect, right?
Yep.
Um, and especially for folks who might be listening to this who don't know what that means, who don't know what taking a course in visual culture means. What can you tell give us a little color on the what's fun about it? Like what do students get to do?
Yeah. So I'll start with experiential learning in general,
Hmm.
because it can take form, it can take color from so many different cool things. Um, so, like, at its most basic level, it's learning through doing. But what I like to say is like learning through reflection on doing. Because I think a lot of times people think, like, oh, well, I do hands on applied work in X or Y or Z, which is experiential and valuable. But for the experiential learning, like the pedagogy and the practice, being able to do that thing and then come back and intentionally reflect on what you did, why you did it, how it connected to the stuff that you're learning in class, that's kind of where the real learning happens. So, for example, all introductory science courses, not all, most, have lab experiences. That is hands on learning, as we all know. But some of our upper level labs, like, really have students self design a project. They start with a hypothesis that's unique to them. They get to do all of the lab practices. And um, instead of having like that nicely set up lab environment, it's messy. Stuff doesn't work. The hypothesis is not proven, the culture doesn't grow, like all of
Hmm.
those
Yeah.
messier things that really allow you to think like, oh, okay,
Right.
what do I need to do next time? How can I reformulate my question? And
Hmm.
so in my area, which is a more humanities based area, we try to do similar things. So we try to think like, okay, well, where are the living labs for the kinds of questions that we would ask in my case, like humanities disciplines?
Hmm.
And I think the two that we're particularly good at Oxford, um, we actually do really well with internship, but it feels like a little bit of an outlier in terms of the connection to um, what I'm teaching right now. So I'm going to bracket that one. But community engaged learning. So we have people going and working with community partners. Sometimes that's project based, where they're like the partner has a specific project that they either need done or they are actively working on, and the student is able to connect with it and learn what's going on in that kind of partnership environment. They come back to the classroom and I mean, it happens in our Spanish language classes. It happens in our psychology classes. It happens in our ethics classes. So the connections can be super wide ranging, even with the same community partner. Um, but that's one thing about experiential learning that I love. The other one is global learning. That one is, maybe kind of the heaviest lift if you're thinking about a model like study abroad in terms of going outside of the United States, or study away, which is travel based learning within the United States. But both of those at Oxford, instead of it being like, you take a semester at a university in X location. For us, the course is still happening on campus with one of our regular faculty. And then the travel component is meant to illustrate, bring to life, allow some immersion on the ground. Like, so you get to see stuff that you've been learning all semester on campus at Oxford with a faculty member you really know. And then the whole class picks up and goes to a place for which those ideas are applied.
Interesting. So does that faculty member stay on campus while that happens?
They travel.
They travel with you
Um,
as well. Yeah,
they
but
do.
mhm,
Yeah. So the faculty member in the subject area travels, and then a co-leader faculty member who's like a maybe a topically adjacent faculty member, like they bring a new perspective to it, or sometimes their expertise seems totally random. And then you get to see like the cool connections when they're on the ground with the students.
mhm,
And then a lot of times we also have someone coming along that's able to connect the academics to some of the student development experience, like the campus life
mhm.
elements.
Yep.
So they might be a professional in that area, and then they kind of help the student kind of make it come full circle in terms of their Oxford experience.
Yeah. There's so much that you said that I want to learn more about. One thing that almost, got me right away was when you were talking about, there's a difference between hands-on learning and that experiential learning that you define, which has the reflective component.
Hmm.
And it's not just a component, it's almost like this iterative thing that keeps
Yeah.
going back and forth. You sort of, it's like one doesn't go without the other, right? And I think something about um uh sort of hands-on learning, especially now that I see um you know these boot camps on this is how you can do a coding in 6 weeks, and then you'll get a six-figure job, I promise, in Silicon Valley.
Yep.
And we it comes with hands-on learning because you have to program something.
Hmm.
So it's not they're not they're telling you the truth that you're going to do something hands-on, um, except that it really doesn't come with the full spectrum of this, what a real experiential learning comes with. And I think that's a really, stark difference, because I think that that reflective piece um, simply takes time and takes experience, takes space to happen, doesn't it?
It does. I like how you imagine it as iterative. I think that's really how we do too. So I think when I'm working with faculty to develop an experiential learning course, um, sometimes where they'll start is like, oh, okay, so we'll do our thing all semester, and then I'll have them write a reflection at the end.
Mhm.
And that is a helpful first step in processing your experience. But what we then try to work on is actually how can you make it cyclical within the course so that the student has a chance to, and this is modeled on the Kolb cycle. It was David Kolb put it out there, and it's an experiential learning cycle where you have kind of pre-learning, then application, then analysis, reflection, and kind of regrouping and going back in. And so that's what we try to help people see how they can do in their courses, or I mean, outside of the classroom, this works too, right? So you'll have kind of a, okay, here's what we will be doing this semester. What do you know? What do you need to know? What skills do you have to learn? And that could be learning with your partner provider in terms of global learning, your community partner with community engaged learning, your principal investigator in the lab, any of those things. What kinds of trainings do you need? What do you know? What skills do you bring to it? What do you need to know? Then you formulate your question, you're learning your concepts in class, you go into the community, and then you come back and you have an intentional period of reflection. And that can be critical analysis, right? Like it doesn't have to be a personal journal article about your
Mhm.
inner development, though it can be that too. We
Mhm.
find that it's most effective if a student kind of can do both of those things. But then you think, okay, well, that's what I learned this week. So when I go back to the partner or I go out into the field tomorrow, what do I need to do differently? Or what do I want to know now? Or how can I problem solve that thing that happened to me? And then
Mhm.
you get to do it
Right.
again.
Right.
So being able to do that several times over the course of the semester really, I think, is where some of the magic happens and
Yeah.
the pain. I mean, like it's not easy, but
Yeah.
it's awesome.
And it's so interesting. Now, when people listen to this, it's probably going to be, timing wise, you're going to have to rewind back. We are now talking in August. The Olympics had just wrapped up in Tokyo. And I've been sort of loosely following, and I just generally really amazed and respect the things that these amazing world class athletes do, and they have the same thing too, right? When you perform at the absolute pinnacle, level of pushing the boundary, the envelope of what a human can do, they are also working in this very iterative way, and some of them do it at real time, meaning
Yep.
that this happened 30 seconds ago. I'm now going to reflect on what I just did wrong, and I'm going to correct it. I'm going to learn from that. um,
Yeah,
Amazing.
I feel like I followed the athletes in the Olympics this time, like with the Tokyo Olympics, in a way that I haven't before. And I was so struck by that. Of course, like maybe the most visible in the US was Simone Biles and, having this colossal, powerful lead up to the Olympics. Everyone's hanging on the edge of their seats to see what she'll do. She gets there and she struggles and she's got the case of the twisties and has to regroup and then regroup again. And every day, like the viewing public isn't sure what's going to happen. She, gets to the I think it was the beam final by the end and is able to compete and kind of get back on the horse in a
Right.
one of the less twisty disciplines.
Mhm.
But then what was very interesting to me is now across YouTube you can see some things that are kind of unpacking what happened, how did she deal with it, how did she train through it, and I love like I'm just hooked on seeing like the process. It's not just about your strength training or your endurance training or your techniques, but like it's in your head. It's how do you approach it? How do you think about it? How do you problem solve? And that's just like
Right.
so cool to me.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely an aspect of learning and pedagogy that it feels like it feels like uh, if you are super focused on the discipline and the skills, sometimes you forget that students also need this aspect of training, and in many ways that's what's going to become most useful for them later on in life, which really speaks to, in my opinion at least, the value of this kind of liberal arts education, because that's really what it allows you to do and apply that to all kinds of situations and scenarios in life. It could be about dealing with, later on in life, maybe it's, what if a family member got sick? What if, it could be any situations, and you have to sort of figure it out, because there isn't a book that you can just, have the skills learned for every situation, right?
I totally agree. That's something that we really work on with actually I mean, all of them, but like especially our internship students. Um, we have like an academic internship course that the students will take alongside an internship that they're doing. But what's interesting about our population of students engaging in these internships is they're first and second year students in college. Most internships that students are competing for at like when they're university students, they're doing that in their junior year or their senior year. One of our really intentional things for these first and second year students is to set up the space to fail, to realize that the field they thought was their ideal field is not for them, or to realize that the field that they say when they're meeting someone or networking actually has a million different components, and they can go into a different direction within
Right.
that field using language they didn't know existed. And so being able to do that in your first and second year means you have a chance to regroup and try again and try something slightly different. So getting to talk to a student who is in their first internship after their first year at college and hated it, and specifically then saying like, okay, that doesn't mean this internship was a failure, that means it was super valuable, because now you get to change course. What are you going to do next? What courses are you going to take to try to get there? How are you going to strategize that? And then the next summer they get to try that thing, hopefully, and maybe it'll go better and maybe it won't. But it's something that I really love about getting to coach internship students at Oxford, where you're doing it in your first and second years, and it's not a kind of sunk cost concern where, like, by the time you're a junior, like, what are you going to do? You're already in business school. You're already in taking finance classes. Like, how much can you change? But after your first year, you definitely can. So I like that.
Yeah, I think that that's so valuable and so important because, and I actually find that I think I've spoken with other Digi scholars about this as well, which is um, when I was in college, I felt like that at least for me, I'm from a Chinese family, and I think that there was pressure that basically said, "Go and do something that gonna make money."
Yep.
And I studied to become an architect. They didn't realize architects actually don't make that much money because it's like it's like you're like an artist,
Yeah.
but which I love, and but it was sort of like this, like for them, they felt like, well, it's a respectable profession, and you get a license, and you are a professional, and that was really like for them really important. And I think for me it was like, okay, yeah, they satisfied those check boxes, and but it was um there was a big part of it has to do with, well, I needed to make a living, or I needed to find something to do, and I could see myself in that job. But today students, at least maybe some students still do this, but I feel like that there are more students that are um, perhaps looking for more purpose and meanings in life, and they feel like that many I feel like that there are many more choices. I feel like that they can now choose companies. Like, even if I were to become an architect today, I might be very specifically looking for architecture firms that do environmental issues, or maybe I don't work for a company that builds, I don't know, casinos. um, and back when I was in school, that didn't, like, yeah, maybe you sort of stay away from, like the like what's almost borderline gray areas, but then everything else is like open for
Yeah.
business. I don't know. It feels really different, and I think that some of the kind of things that you're talking about, these experiences students have, allows them to develop those passion, allows them to also make a decision on, hold on a minute, I've been in this environment, this internship made me understand that this job requires a lot of whatever it is that they don't like. It may be
Yep.
politics, it may be the power dynamics, maybe a gender inequality. I mean, many disciplines have that, right? And they can just say, you know what, maybe that's the part that I don't want to do, or that's the part that I want to change, or somewhere they can sort of change course. I think that's so valuable.
Yeah, one of the things we really work hard with students doing internships, but also the research students and students that might do global learning or work in the community, is like try to think more granularly, like that. systems are complicated and there are a lot of interlocking parts, some of which you can control and choose and shape, and some of them you can't as easily, and you feel a little more buffeted about by them. So, like, how how do you navigate a path where you are always assessing, like, what are my values? Does this experience fit with my values and my needs, which includes the need to make a living and have a stable
Right.
home and environment? Like, so I think sometimes, especially when like some of my more hard science or business students find out that I'm in the humanities, they're expecting me to be sitting there and trying to talk them out of what they think they want to do.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not. I'm always trying to be like, okay, first, how could the thing your liberal arts experience, like the things you're learning in the well-rounded spectrum of your class, like how can that make you a better architect, financial advisor, doctor, whatever? Like, I want doctors who care about art. I don't necessarily want the person who wanted to be a doctor to become an artist. Like, I just I try to get them thinking about, like, being a human doing
Mhm.
these things. So
Right.
it's interesting that you brought up kind of like coming from a Chinese family with certain expectations and pressures,
Mhm.
because one of my research students who is also Chinese has been talking to me a lot about family pressures and expectations. She'll be going to the business school. She'll be doing, I think it was a finance degree. I don't mean to be like scapegoating finance. Finance is very important. But in her
Right.
case, she's like, last year I did this high powered internship in Beijing. This year I'm doing another one. Both of those have been fine, but she's also my research student. So she's doing this humanities research. And she's like, that's what I'm loving. That's where my passion is. But I don't actually want to give up on this other thing that I've committed to. So a lot of our conversations are about, like, okay, well, how could you shape your use of your business degree in a way that allows you to be more creative, allows you to do research and generate reports in a way that's a little more fulfilling? How can you find that trajectory through your field? Um, and it's been wonderful because I think she felt like it was an either or. And I think, you were saying you feel like students have more choices, or maybe they're just framing their profession and their values a little bit differently. But
Mhm.
I think it is sometimes a process of seeing,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, give give it a try the
Yeah.
way you're hoping it'll work and see what happens next.
I
But
think,
also recognize that you never know. Like, how
yeah.
did you get from architecture to digication?
Um, well, that will definitely should be an episode at some point.
Unto
But
itself.
I'll give you the really short version of it. I after during when I was actually a student in architecture, I started doing all these you know computer graphics and things like and things on a computer and learn how to use technology. And I ended up teaching at the school in architecture and a few other sort of computer graphics type areas. And and it was through that I fell in love with education. And so the education was really something that I it was accidental. We started together
Yes.
accidentally because I we created it initially just for our students with zero expectation that it wasn't even a piece of software. It was almost just like how you were talking about you're designing a curriculum, maybe with a faculty member and trying to incorporate reflection. For us
Yeah.
is nothing more than like, I mean, look, it's important work, but it was just part of teaching and that was it. And but we sort of came up with a tool for it, and it was almost accidentally it to prove that it wasn't 4 years into it that the school that we taught at discovered that's what we were doing and said, can we pay you guys some money and so that we can use it for the rest of the school? and we had no idea what that really meant. We were like,
Yeah.
okay, I guess, like, and so it was an accident, really.
But
Uh,
I love that it came out of your experience as an educator, that it rose from things that you were discovering through teaching. And I think, if we consider educator even more broadly outside of the university context in the way that can kind of give rise to a coming together of passions and professional expertise and whatever, that was part of why I asked, because I feel like, don't all of us kind of accident our way into
right.
stuff that really fits our
Yeah.
passions?
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like that might be the case.
Yeah. And I do think that there is also something. I mean, back to the internship idea there that you were, the example you were giving about your students, which is a perfect example. I also find that at least in 2021, it feels like that there are more and more organizations, employers themselves, who are more aware of the type of um, that they can they can put certain thing they can place certain priorities in what they do that they didn't used to be able to do, because it feels like, oh, that would be polarizing, or that would upset a certain segment of our potential customers. No, look, they still exist, clearly. um, and um, and but there are many more, I would say, outspoken employers now, where you can align your values so much
Yeah,
better.
they're
And
much
I
more
really
transparent.
feel like that. I really feel like that it used to be like, sure, you can go work for a charity or it's a for profit. That was it.
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
know. And so if you want to do good, don't think you're going to do well. Um,
Yes,
and uh,
yes.
and that's really not the case these days. I feel like that you have the choice. Sometimes they're harder for some people. It depends on the luck too, what's around and all that, and what part of the country you're in, and so on and so forth. But I think that if you seek it out today, it's not nearly as hard to find anymore.
And I think now maybe students realize that they can also ask those questions.
Hmm.
That it's okay to ask about company
Sure.
values,
Right.
um, ethic,
Right. Right.
projects.
This concludes part one of our conversation with Jill Petersen Adams from Oxford College of Emory University. To hear part two, be sure to subscribe to Digication Scholars Conversations on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Digication Scholars Conversations is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative ePortfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. This episode was produced by Drew Albanesius. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for watching.